Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. This is episode number 67 of the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. We've got Dussex joining us today. Tasso is in the shop. Scotty's in the shop. I'm in the shop. And we are here today because we have to talk about the sad news that was just unveiled, which is that Subaru has officially killed off the STI, at least on the WRX platform. But it seems like, I don't know, it seems like there's change is happening, but that there's not going to be an STI that's part of it in Subaru currently. So I've kind of written a piece on it already. What is your guys' take on it, or what are your thoughts?
So I got a question first. Is the whole division of the company shut down, or they're just not making an Impreza WRX STI anymore?
As far as what it sounds like, and somebody pointed out that, and it is worth mentioning, that this is a Subaru of America announcement. So Tom Dahl, who's the CEO of Subaru of America, announced that there would not be a WRX STI. So I'd swear, and I'm going to have to try and find it, but I'd swear that there was an announcement saying like that there's a 2023 model of the STI in Japan with an FA20 engine in it, making 315 horsepower. I distinctly remember seeing that because it caused me concern of like, well, if they're going to give us a 2-liter direct injected STI, but it's only going to make 315 horsepower, that might not go over so well here. But now I'm not sure if, now I'm wondering if I actually saw that or just I was looking at something different.
I mean, I bet that would go over better than not having one at all.
Maybe, for sure, yeah.
Well, and I mean, I saw something else, basically like the new WRX came out and everybody lost their mind just talking about it being garbage and I mean, it looks like crap. And then, Subaru of America basically just like, oh, well, nobody likes the way this thing looks, so we're just not going to make an STI here. Which, I mean, who the hell knows?
Yeah.
STI as a company is still going. I mean, they're still supporting their race cars. They're still doing everything that they have to do. But yeah, I don't know. The main thing is if they're talking about having an all electric STI, I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to it at all. They need to have an STI in one way, shape, or another. I have two major concerns, and I'm going to bring up two other companies that have done things that I think is kind of scary. The first one is Mitsubishi. They got rid of the Evo, right? And then they brought the Evo back, and it's some like mini SUV. And of course that didn't go over very well. Right. So, that it's, the fear is real because another company's already done it. The other fear that I have is what Ford just did with their new Mustang Mach-E.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're getting rid of the STI, but we're going to bring back an electric version of it. And if they follow Ford's footsteps, all of a sudden, like, well, we got rid of the Mustang, here's the new Mustang, and it's essentially the size of a small tank, and it has almost none of the power or the performance or the thrill of, and I fucking hate Mustangs to begin with, but still, like a regular Mustang would have been better than this Mach-E. And so a fear is okay, we're bringing back the all electric STI, and it's basically a cross-track body with STI badging on it, all electric. And I mean, so those are my two fears.
Isn't that what the Solterra is, really? I mean, or whatever that new thing is coming out?
Yeah, well, as far as an electric SUV, yes. And we were told from some of the Subaru people that were at the unveiling that they said that there was going to be a performance version of that. And so what makes me wonder is is that like maybe next year or 2 years from now, is if there's an STI version of the Solterra, in their mind, is that going to replace the STI? But then I've also heard that Subaru is saying that the part of the shift that they're taking is they want to have an all-electric version of a majority of the cars in their lineup, including the STI. So, yeah, and keep in mind too, it's worth mentioning this too. In Japan, there are STI trim levels for a lot more cars, way more cars than we have here, pretty much every car. But like there's an STI trim level of the, I think they're calling it the S4 of the 2022 WRX, and it's all appearance stuff. And like there's a BRZ STI, but a lot of the STI badging is just aesthetic stuff or different colors of the interior. It's not the car that is fully tuned by and built by Subaru Technica International. So,
The
yeah,
STI has always sold trim pieces before. I mean, it's for more, at least a decade and probably more. That's just all I know about. You could go buy your STI sill plate, or some of your floor mats or your shift knob or something like that, right? Like, so
that's definitely been a part of it. Yeah.
I have a contentious, cynical viewpoint that I've been biting my tongue. I was listening to another live group or whatever last night and bit my tongue and not threw this out there at that point. But I don't know
Throw
if
it
I
out there,
can
Tasso.
keep holding it. The STI died in 2008.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The second they went CAN bus, it was already too electrical.
And
then that was the end of performance Subarus.
I've seen some people say that basically the 2007 STI was the last true STI.
Right. And I say that acknowledging that I'm looking at at least one mustachioed heartbreaker here who does great things with a later Subaru. But so with all due respect to your awesome ass car, it's, what are we really losing here? We already have an SUV with an EJ25 in it in the current model of Imprezas, so might as well make it electric and just acknowledge the Mach-E.
Well, it's the FA24 if you're talking about the Ascent.
No, the current Imprezas are basically SUVs.
Okay.
They're gigantic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're already crossovers with sports-oriented styling.
So let me ask you guys this: do you think that Subaru had an STI that they were about to release, or do you think that there was not a next generation STI? And I ask that because I mean, in looking and getting excited about this potential next car, I mean, I remember I've seen a lot of like wrapped up in like the black and whites, padding stuff, test mules that seemed like they were the STI. There's been so many reports or speculation or leaks from Subaru that the next STI was going to be, making close to 400 horsepower and stuff like that. It really seems like for the last handful of years they've been working on a next generation STI. So, like, do you think they've been working on that, or do you not think that they have?
I definitely think they have.
I think they have too. You can't just decide like 6 months before you release that you're going to build one of these cars. So they've definitely have had to been at least working on it from an engineering perspective for the last several years, right? I mean, you'd have to.
It seems like that's been the case. And you'd figure if they weren't working on an STI, the rumors that would have been coming out would have been that they weren't working on one, as opposed to this next STI could really be this ultimate version that we've all been waiting for. But where that's significant is if they were working on it and if they spent the development dollars on it already, which again, it seems like, and maybe it's coming out in Japan still. I've got to try and find a definitive answer on whether or not that is going to happen or not. But if they did spend that money to develop the car and they've killed it off still, like that's even a more significant decision because all that money spent is now basically for naught.
I mean, I think though, if you like, this is almost because what a lot of people want to see, and I'm included in this, is Subaru returning to the WRC.
Right.
Like, I think that would be like this awesome thing that happened. And I think this announcement, the termination of the Impreza WRX STI program, is probably the first step necessary to make that happen. Because as it was, the cars were way too big compared to the current crop of WRC cars, and they did not have an off-the-shelf hybrid model, whether for homologation or just technology purposes. So I think they need to go to like a subcompact hybrid car in order to even, and I'm not saying this is what's actually going on, but if there was even a chance for Subaru to return to the WRC, then killing the Impreza STI would have to be one of the first steps, because I think people would be even more mad if they said, oh, the 2024 model of the Impreza is going to be a two-door hatch, front wheel drive in this country. People would flip their shit, right? But that's sort of what they need to do if they were ever to get back into WRC or something like that, which again, I think is pretty still far flung, but where they were, the Impreza had wandered so far off of its roots that, it was a dead model from a performance standpoint.
Well, especially in terms of getting back into rally, because it's worth the history lesson of where the Impreza came from in the first place, because there was the legacy, and they had the legacy WRC car. And they realized back in the very late 80s, early 90s, that the legacy was too big and too heavy of a chassis to compete with the other cars. So they came out with a smaller, lighter chassis, and that was the Impreza. And that's what they had a lot more success in. And towards the end, like in 2008, when they ran, I think, the one season with the new hatchback STI, but it was not competitive and it was too big. It was kind of the same lesson or same spot that they were in with the legacy back at the beginning of the 90s, where they had to come out with something newer and smaller. And Tasso, it's not that far flung, because so Subaru and Toyota, they're becoming more and more closely related. And there's been some rumors that have come out that Toyota wanted to work with Subaru to develop like this current generation of WRC car, because they wanted to tap into and use some of Subaru's expertise in the WRC to develop a car. But like to your point, on the current Impreza WRX chassis, it's too big. Like everything that's out there running in WRC right now, it's like a Toyota Yaris size, or like the Hyundai, was it the i3, which is like really small. Like the closest Subaru that I can think of that's comparable in size to what is running in WRC right now is like the old Justy.
Right.
Like
or in current models, the Crosstrek, which is interestingly what they use Subaru Canada in the Canadian Rally Championship. Their factory cars at least were based on a Crosstrek chassis because the Subaru was too big, or the Impreza was too big. So, but I mean, if we can go ahead and just fully go down this like fan fiction rabbit hole, right? They mention Rally Heritage in their announcement, right? So, and that's something that hasn't been a part of really Subaru's factory effort for some time, outside of their support of Vermont Sports Car and their kind of thing, right?
Right.
But then also you mentioned that involvement with Toyota. That's another company who was not involved in rally at a high level for a long time after their penalty with the restrictors in the Celica days, right? And they decided at some point, hey, let's get back into this thing. After some time, they essentially created a program out of nothing, out of the blue, and did really well. And so, if anyone can help Subaru come back from dead and cold ashes and create a program from the ground up to do that, it could be Toyota. So again, I think it's pretty far flung, but these are all steps that needed to happen if that was even going to be a chance. I don't think they could have continued to market the Impreza STI and say rally inspired. But that's not what we rally. But it's inspired, but it's not what we rally. But it's inspired. So but, yeah.
Do you? So you brought up Vermont Sports Car and the Subaru USA Rally Team, and having them killing off the STI. That, to me, that brings up a lot of questions about that. Are they going to keep doing that? They're the only factory team left, so they're pretty much like, I think they've got 3 cars now, and they're all kind of like vying for the top position amongst themselves. But there's
a couple outsiders that have come in R5s and done really well, and actually like Snowdrift was won by a privateer, and so they are a really good team, but they aren't the end all be all dominant entity. But there's two sides there. There's the business standpoint. Does it still make sense for them to get factory support? And that goes into whether or not you think racing on Sunday and selling on Monday is still effective for factories when what they sell is Outbacks and Crosstreks, right? Like, so it's,
Yeah.
Is that still there? I think there's a lot of people that will totally die on that hill and say, hell yeah. And it's, as a racer myself, like I want that to be the case because I want factory support because I'm racing on Sunday. So there's a business side, and I can't speak to what Vermont Sports Car or Subaru would have to say about that. But just logistically for like making race cars, oh no, if they don't make another STI, what's Vermont Sports Car going to use? It doesn't matter. I mean, they cut those shells up so hard. They cut out the strut towers. They cut out the rear floors. They cut off the front clip. I mean, the only thing, it doesn't matter if it's STI, Impreza, or a WRX when they make those cars.
Crosstrek.
I mean, they cut out the center tunnel. They cut out the rear wheel wells and strut towers. They cut out the front strut towers and wheel wells. They cut out the whole floor in the rear. So
the only thing that's really left is basically the silhouette and the appearance of the car.
Yeah, factory floor pan. It's allowed to be modified for exhaust to sneak it up in there with the drive shaft.
And the drivetrain, because they're using SEDEV sequentials now, so that they're not even using a drivetrain based on what you could buy from the factory anymore.
Well, they're not using a motor that you can buy from the factory anymore either. Yeah, I mean, they're selling nothing but the new cars, FA20, FA24 with these new cars, but these guys are on 25-year-old EJ20, race technology. So I mean, nothing in those cars is actually anything you can go out and buy today. Period. They're
basically using the technology from the outgoing WRC program, the EJ20K, the closed deck 2 liter.
Companies like Possum Born and Roger Clark and stuff like that, and I know that stuff is in that kind of history. So I don't know. So logistically, does it matter for U.S. factory-backed teams? Yeah. Logistically, car construction-wise, no, doesn't matter.
Right. But from an advertising standpoint, it's like it's going to be so far removed now from anything that you would potentially be able to buy. Though, I mean, to be fair, I mean, the WRX is still a performance platform. I mean, it's different now, but it's still a performance platform.
Sure.
It's just not the same. I just don't think it's the same as the STI.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think the most interesting thing about this whole thing, outside of all these far-flung thought processes that we've just gone through, is that they mention their rally heritage and what it means to them. They went out of the way in like a 5-line, 100-word announcement. They went out of their way to use up a line and a fifth of their words on mentioning their rally heritage, which is something they haven't really had for some time. So,
but that was Subaru USA. That I mean, the release of this was Subaru USA because in the USA we're the only people that actually they're still running like a rally in a Subaru, right? I mean, the WRC doesn't have it. I would imagine like when they released that in Japan, there might not have been very much like rally heritage.
There's AP4 cars like I don't know if it's, I might be totally wrong about this. I assume it's the Asian Pacific 4-wheel drive is like the class, right? And so that's like what the Crosstreks are like for the Canadian program. And I might have my chicken and egg backwards here, but I think that they were based on the AP4 cars out of like the oceanic continent, like Australia, New Zealand, stuff like that, where they still run that class. It's their version of like the WRC is cost prohibitive, and now it's crazy with hybrids and stuff like that. Right. But here is our top level class for our Oceanic Championship and stuff, or Oceania, or whatever they call that continent down there of those islands. So,
and it's worth mentioning too, like there are so many like trim pieces from STI, like the STI Cherry Blossom Red stuff and all that. But that stuff is huge in Japan because the fans of Subaru in Japan are fans of Subaru because of the racing heritage. Like even if you have just a base level Subaru whatever, there's a huge following in Japan and enthusiast base in Japan that wants any piece of that heritage that they can put on the car, something that says STI or that's in Cherry Blossom Red, to still tap into that. So I think that, I mean, if there's still an STI in Japan, that'll tell us a lot. I think the fact that they did the development and it's still coming out in Japan, and it's not a world market car anymore.
Sure. Yeah. The last thing I'll say before I stop bogarting this whole podcast, because I do want to hear from you guys too, because this is just thoughts I've had lately, is that when I get people to come up to me at races and ask, how do I get involved in this? Oh, that's so cool. That's that. They're not talking about, oh, I just picked up a 2018 STI. How do I get involved in this? They're saying, oh, I just picked up a GC with a STI swap, or I just picked up a bug eye with a blown motor. What should I do to get into rally and stuff like that? So it's, I don't like at least coming from my, dirt perspective on the whole thing. I don't think that this will carry much weight or affect, maybe in 10 years when 2020 STIs are the old cheap models that people pick up to make into race cars. But even still right now, it's people don't associate those with rallying. They associate, some people, Southern Californians, with their mud flaps and their lifts for some reason on an STI.
Right.
But a lot of folks, they still associate the 2.5 RS and the bug eye and the early GDs as being like, oh, I just picked up one of these to make into a rally car.
The ones that you actually saw, like the WRC cars and stuff like that, as race cars. Dussex, you've been awful quiet. What do you think?
Trying to compete with Tasso over here just for some screen time.
There you go.
Usually it's the other way around.
Yeah. So
what do you think, Tasso or Dussex?
I mean, all this whole STI thing and Preza thing, and they were basically saying that there wasn't going to be an essentially an exclusive ICE car, an internal combustion engine car only. That doesn't mean that they won't have like a hybrid drivetrain. And there's so many ways that you can do hybrid drivetrains that would be pretty easy to integrate. So like one of the things we were hoping for in the STI was a DSG. So it's like a totally different transmission. So there's no reason that they can't integrate like an electric motor basically as part of the bell housing section of a DSG transmission, where you don't have a clutch, you don't have a flywheel, you just have a drive plate basically. And then you run this drive plate coupler through a hybrid motor. Now where you put the batteries and stuff, or what kind of difference that makes, all that kind of stuff adds into it. But if they're able to get 2 or 3 miles per gallon better in an STI, they're not notoriously known for good fuel economy and haven't been for like 10 plus years, or maybe longer than that, 15 years.
It's been had the worst economy of every car in the Subaru lineup probably since the Tribeca left.
Yeah.
And maybe even before that. Yeah.
You look at it like that, and you look at it in like the competitive line that it's in. We don't know for sure, but the direct injected Toyota Corolla, if it comes out with the GR Corolla, if it comes out with the yours, that thing's without a doubt going to be able to beat 23 miles to the gallon on the highway or whatever the STI gets. Maybe, it's pretty optimistic. I think Trey was saying he gets like 13 miles a gallon in his current trim, but it's also a 400 horsepower car. But either way, so you look at like the time and stuff that they maybe have already spent on this car, and we're talking about we wanted a DSG because we wanted that trickle down technology to go into the rest of our older EJs, right? Like, hey, this is an Avenue, blah blah blah, because there's nothing that conservatively bolts to an EJ that would fix a lot of the stick shift issues. But if they were already going to have to design a transmission from scratch or whatever, or source one or whatever that looks like, then how hard would it have been to be like, okay, we've got all this stuff to this point right now. We've got an STI, the FA24. It's only an ICE engine. How hard would it be to integrate, a hybrid platform, especially with Toyota's help? And then, an extra year or whatever, and boom, they have a hybrid. At least a hybrid motor between the engine and transmission, which is pretty common. That's how the Priuses are. That's how the Hondas are and stuff like that. You could do that. That's kind of one of those, like, that's probably the easiest thing to execute, because they didn't say that it was going to be no ICE. It was going to be that they were talking about it was going to have some form of electrification.
Right.
So it could still utilize an ICE engine. It can use, maybe like a 40, which would be pretty substantial, like a 40 or 50 horsepower electric motor, and get it that torque where it needs to be. They could put a bigger turbo on it. You look at like the options and the ideas of like what they could do with a hybrid, just a hybrid motor in that location. And you're like, oh, this is kind of exciting, like put a bigger turbo on it. It's easier for them to make 350, 400 horsepower. You got more low end torque. You got a car that maybe gets 27 miles to the gallon instead of 23 or whatever on the highway. Better in town. I mean, there's a lot of cool like potentials there. And that's just from like, I think the easiest way to execute a blended drivetrain. I mean, there's other things that are exciting, and it would take obviously a lot of work. But when you look at that Concept RE or whatever it was they made, that coupe
STI ERA. Yep.
ERA, you look at it like from that perspective, and you look at the challenges we have as Impreza owners trying to race these cars, especially in the road course racing, where the whole engine is in front of the drivetrain.
Yeah.
Like, what if you basically had an STI that was a larger or a wider two-door version of the BRZ, where instead, and so you have an FA24, you have like say a DSG rear-wheel drive transmission, all that stuff is tucked way back, and then you have electric motors driving the front wheels, and now you have an all-wheel drive hybrid drivetrain where you can actually turn without a ton of re-engineering. And that, I mean, so it sucks. I almost feel like they have, hold on.
Someone's calling.
I know Jared is trying to get in on the podcast here.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got this idea where it sucks, and it's kind of a bold statement to say we're not going to come out with it, and it is coming from such a small window. But we're in a kind of a world where Wendy's will openly make fun of people on their Twitter stream, and Elon Musk can say one thing and like up or down or devalue, stuff. Like social media has gotten to a point where stunts are one of those things that kind of sparks, conversation.
Well, I think they spark conversation, but I don't think this has sparked. I have not seen a lot of positive conversation that this has sparked. So I don't think that they would have done it from that motivational standpoint.
Well, at the same point in time, in the Subaru world, there's been nothing but negativity about it. From some of the people I follow on Instagram that aren't into Subaru, there are some positive comments coming from it. Basically just telling, Subaru fanboys, you've been bitching about having, an archaic EJ motor in these cars forever, and you wanted them to change it. And now they're announcing that they're going to change it. So basically just shut the hell up and let them, let them do what they're going to do. So, and the other thing I really want to talk about is it's not Subaru, and it's especially not Subaru of America. This is STI, right? So this is
an STI version. Yeah.
Well, no, it's STI in general, right? So STI is the race division of Subaru. Yeah. So STIs, like nowadays, they're made in basically the same plant, but there's STIs separate. They're a completely different thing, So if STI made the decision to not do something here, it's got to be because of like new regulations, emissions, everybody trying to reach these new things, and that is globally with a lot of these manufacturers. But in the U.S., I mean, how regulations in Colorado have changed significantly since the first of the year. So, you got to think that maybe they're really trying to like STIs, like we're just not going to do anything there yet until we have something new that we can bring.
Well, there's a key thing to consider with what you're saying there, Scotty, which is the S209. So it used to be like back in the early 90s when you had an STI, it was a WRX that then went to STI and was tuned by STI, and STI would do the final assembly. Super Technic International would do the final assembly on STIs. And then it got to this point, I think actually back in 2004, where like they started really mass producing the STI, where it was the STIs were not built by STI, they were built on the Subaru assembly line with some tuner parts, whatever. But the S209 to me in this conversation is hugely significant because it's the first S car that was available here. And technically speaking, Super Technic International is a separate company from Subaru. So they had to spend a ton of money to get that S209 certified. Basically, is like a bespoke car because it had enough things that were different, a different assembly engine, different turbocharger, all this sort of stuff, to get it certified so that they could sell it here in the United States. It basically was bringing Subaru Technic International to the same level as a manufacturer as Subaru is here in the United States.
Mhm.
But the really interesting part about that is now that they have done that, if they wanted to run another car through Subaru Technic International for bespoke parts and final assembly and stuff like that, now that all the foundation is put into place, it's going to be far less expensive and far easier to bring an STI assembled car to the United States again. And you'd have to figure it would be crazy for them to have spent all of that money and energy on the S209 to bring it here and not have any plans to ever bring something else to the United States through Subaru Technic International.
Sure.
You'd think.
And again, so that S209 was built and assembled by Subaru Technic International, not Subaru. So,
right.
If I don't know if anyone's had the chance to look at a S209, but every single bolt in the whole entire car has 3 paint marks on it.
Yeah.
Where like actual people with torque wrenches went through and torqued this wrench and put a paint mark on it, and somebody else went through and torqued that exact same nut and put a paint mark on it. So different companies here.
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping is that STI is really trying to push some amazing technology here in the future. I just hope that Subaru, especially Subaru of America, doesn't step in and say, yeah, that's all fine and dandy. You like STI, you make some really cool stuff. So now we're going to put it in this great big body because that's what Americans want. Just like Ford did with their Mach-E.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, so the fears are there. I have a little bit of paranoia.
Well, so I can't remember exactly what the context of the conversation was, but at some point in a podcast in not too far back, we talked about the fact that like in Japan, like the highest level of racing competition they're doing right now is with the BRZ GT300. They just won the for the first time the championship with that car last year, 2021. So like from a factory backed standpoint, the BRZ is now the pinnacle of the motorsports platform for Subaru, not the WRX and STI. And like there was when I first heard about all this information about the S209, what it took to get it over here, the first speculation that people had was, what if they ran an BRZ through Subaru Technic International for assembly? Do you think that there's a possibility, because what they specifically said in this announcement, that there's not an STI on the WRX platform or with an internal combustion engine? Do you think it's possible now with this new chassis of the BRZ, which is like from everything that we've heard is a big step forward from the last one? Do you think, and actually even without doing this at this point, the BRZ is now like the performance flagship for Subaru. Like now that this announcement has come out, the BRZ as it sits right now is the flagship for performance. Do you think this opens the door for an STA version of the BRZ?
Yeah. I would hope.
Yeah.
I would hope. I mean, and it's, if they're still planning on doing the WRX, there are people who can still use that platform and maybe tune it and maybe do what they need to do with that platform. And I think that the Subaru fanboys will lose their damn mind if they do come out with like the new STI is just a BRZ rear wheel drive. I think that they would
be really cool.
It would be amazing. I mean, I would. Thanks for it. I would sign myself up for it.
Yeah,
it's still a good place to use hybrid technology too.
Could be.
And that's what has been missing. I know Subaru offers hybrid stuff, but to Ryan's point, earlier mentioning how, like a simple internal combustion car is gone, but hybrids are also cool and they're a good thing and they open up a lot of opportunities. I mean, even look at, people were worried about the WRC and their move to hybrids this year. Because, oh, well, it's just going to be like Formula E, stuff like that. It's like, no, the cars are just now launching with 500 or 600 horsepower from a dead stop. And they're doing transits in electric mode, dead silent through town. Like it's amazing. Aerodynamically, it's been really interesting to watch those cars develop. And now they're using the hot exhaust air from the electric coolers or the coolers to electric system to improve their aerodynamics. So they're taking something that had to happen and they're like, yeah, why not make better aerodynamics using this stuff, right? So it's, I mean, look at Formula One. We don't even think about the power units now, as opposed to, it's a fact of Formula One. Where early on it was a gimmick, right? They would put little battery bars on every car's like onboard telemetry when you were, getting their, cockpit view and stuff like that. There'd be a little, let's see where their charge is at, and even the gimmick effect of that wore off. And now it's just, I mean, they mentioned it last night in that live chat group about, what Sergio Perez was able to do defending, just because he had really creative battery use strategies, right? And he was able to take a car which was, objectively slower on worse tires, and still it opens up a bunch of really cool things. The hybridization. It's, for me, because it's not a purity thing. It's not a purist thing for me, but it's just, I like the noises and I like simplicity. So whatever, from my perspective, but from a straight up performance perspective, from where the future is going, you can't help but at least be interested in what kind of performance stuff hybrid technology opens up.
Well, yes, but okay. First question is, how much support in fan base do you think there is for the STI because of what can be done to it versus what it is just off the showroom floor? And the reason where I think that's significant, especially in terms of a conversation about the car, if it would come back as a hybrid, is, I mean, there might be a way for aftermarket to get into stuff, but from what I've seen, any of the cars that are hybrid drivetrains, like modifying them is way more difficult and complex, and usually doesn't happen because of how much more complicated the drivetrain is. So, like, let's say they come out with a hybrid version of the STI and it does make 400 horsepower. Are you going to be completely stuck and married to that car as it is because of all the electronic systems and how the electric power has to mate up and work with the power that the internal combustion engine makes? And if you start tweaking the ICE engine, it's going to completely throw off the hybrid drivetrain.
Just wait till someone figures out how to hook up a Tactrix cable or a Carberry ROM to a hybrid system, right?
Sure.
And people think this about Teslas too. Like, once you dial in the DLCs and there's nothing else you can do, like, bullshit. It's just people haven't paid attention to it yet. The minds that you need are still playing with their Subarus or with their Evo 8s and 9s. Those minds, once they run out of parts, 4G and EJ parts, they're going to start pulling out Tesla stuff, and people already are. I mean, look at I forget the name of the company, but the Hoonigans have gone and check it out. That guy in Southern California that's breaking down Tesla parts.
Unplugged performance.
Yeah. He's putting that shit in everything and just making absurd cars. Like, it's
with Tesla drivetrains.
Yeah. It's not. Sure, right? People said the same thing about, fuel injection in turbo cars, right? Like, well, it's great, I guess, if you like a little bump in horsepower, but nothing lets me play with the car like my carburetor.
Right.
Right. Yeah, and now you have standalones that can tell you whether or not you fart too hard in your drag strip. Like, it's, the technology is just blowing up there, right?
Yeah.
And hybrids are waiting for that right now, and they're starting to. It's not common knowledge, but probably there's guys already doing rad shit with hybrids in their garages.
I mean, doesn't Contentious have like a crazy hybrid, like just electric motor that they bolt to the back of their small engine or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's something that's like, it's like the size of like a 1 liter soda bottle, and it weighs like
this
35
big and it makes
pounds.
300 horsepower.
Yeah.
And I mean, with Tesla, they're constantly coming out with updates, right? and so that it's all electric. But they come out with an update, and it's like, bloop. Well, we just made plaid mode have an extra 100 horsepower, regardless of what it is. So hybrid. So from the factory, it comes with the 50 horsepower motor. Okay, maybe to the two front wheels. But then all of a sudden, they could just like, well, here's an update. Now each wheel makes 100 horsepower.
Potentially.
Potentially. I mean, it all depends on the motor and the batteries and what their capabilities of it is. But I mean, if I don't know, the potential is there.
Well,
they just it has to be executed correctly.
And I think the same potential is there if they really do go all electric. They have to let us know. I want to say this before I go to this next point. They have to let us know what they're thinking and what the motivation was for this as soon as possible, because they've already ticked off a lot of people. They've probably lost about 25% of the enthusiast base that like were cobbling together their funds and ready to pounce and buy the new STI. Me too. By taking it away. And like you said, the GR Corolla is coming out. Like you want to let people know what you're moving, why you've made this decision, what direction you're moving as soon as possible. So Subaru, for all of you people at Subaru that are listening, which is probably none, but that's okay. You've got to tell us as soon as possible, like give us a window in. I think the window, Dussex, you brought it up, is the ERA, the STI ERA. There's a huge potential there. And if they build that car and that technology trickles down to an STI that we can buy, that could be amazing. Now, all right, so the STI ERA makes 1,073 horsepower. There's another electric car that is very significant and prominent that also makes exactly 1,073 horsepower. You guys know which one that is?
Is that the plaid?
No,
it's the
Porsche Mission R.
Yeah, that one.
So that's a car, an all-electric car that Porsche has developed. What they say is to basically be an electric version of a club racing car, like a GT3 that people can take out. And 911 performance and reliability and duration at a track day is their goal with that car. Porsche has always been a target for Subaru. Like they said that the Cayman was their target for the BRZ. The fact that the ERA and the Porsche Mission R make exactly the same horsepower cannot be a mistake, especially because it's an odd number. 1,073, come on, like that's weird. But the other part of it is there is a new series that the FIA is going to kick off, I think next year, 2023, which is their EGT series, electronic GT series. And the Mission R would fall into this, and so does the STI ERA. It falls under the category of this FIA electronic GT class. They'd have to turn the power down because the ERA makes 800 kilowatts of power. The cap is 430 kilowatts, which is right around 570 horsepower. But it specifically says in the FIA rules that it can have 2 or 4 electric motors and driving the rear wheels or all 4 wheels. And the Subaru is electric motor on each wheel. So what would be cool to me is if Subaru's going to participate in this, and basically this ERA, they're going to build it and try and go out there and probably set a Nürburgring record with it, or maybe they bring it to Pikes Peak, which would be also amazing. But it's the platform that they could then plug into this new FIA racing series that's supposed to be a world and international series, and that this is now where Subaru is going to spend their racing dollars. And if that technology trickles down, like the potential of an electric car that has 4 motors is huge, I think.
Well, we saw even when they did after they won that GT series, with the BRZ, they were like, we are excited and we're going to put, X amount of effort into like tarmac stuff, basically. Mm-hmm. And that's been pretty exciting. And maybe this is part of it. I mean, like, regardless of this, what happens, the EJ was already so far behind in the times that it was a big jump we were expecting. And really, Subaru is just behind in general on everything, like compared to all the other manufacturers right there. So, I mean, it's almost like you need a big jump like this, a big stunt like this to try and even maintain relevance,
I think.
Go ahead. Look at how many Volkswagen subsidiaries have dropped out of internal combustion racing altogether, right? And I forget now who's pulling the strings at Subaru, if it's still Fuji or Toyota has some controlling share in that or what. But the writing has been on the wall that all the other major, head honchos, right, have done that, and that's where they're spending their racing dollars now. To refocus on another one of those series makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and just the potential is huge. I mean, the problem with there being an STA version of the BRZ is actually Toyota, because there's also the GT86, and those are the same car, but then it's now the Toyota has a 4-cylinder Supra. So if you put a turbo engine in the BRZ, it would be potentially a direct competitor with the 4-cylinder Supra. And you could detune it and make it have less power, less displacement, all this sort of thing. But Toyota already has a car on that market. My fingers crossed hope maybe is that Subaru could make a deal where like, all right, we're going to kill off the STI, but then you have to let us make an STI version of the BRZ that maybe the BRZ is competitive with the 4-cylinder Supra, but the Toyota doesn't get that because they have the 4-cylinder Supra. But that might be way too optimistic.
It might not be that smart for Subaru to try and do that, mostly because the reason why I think the STI and Impreza was so good for them was because they weren't competing against themselves and against other big marquees. With Mitsubishi kind of going away and then pretty much everything performance related being rear-wheel drive, I mean, it's almost silly that Toyota has a 4-cylinder turbo Supra and they have the FRS and they have the big supermotor, and it's just like those cars are really like kind of stepping on each other, like you're like these $10,000 price points and you keep jumping into the next one. And the STI, I think if they were to do something like that, I mean, they'd be competing against probably the largest competitor in the industry who's already saturating the market themselves just for, I think, their own amusement more than anything.
Right.
So I almost feel like, Toyota. Yeah. I almost feel like trying to make a rear-wheel drive BRZ STI would be probably a tough sell for themselves. Sure, Toyota, I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever, that's fine, I get it, but it might not sell as well as they would hope it would,
right?
Especially if the price demands it. But if they were able to modify that chassis and the cladding on the outside looked a little different, and it was all-wheel drive, even though like the underpinnings were based on that same platform, that would be a huge sell, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think that sales though are what's driving these decisions so much, right? Like, so it's the Supra probably did fine based on its heritage, but not because anyone cared about its performance other than a handful of us kind of people, right? So like what I'm curious about here is like what it makes me think is I wonder how a 4-wheel drive hot Corolla will do or something like that.
The GR Corolla, yeah.
Right.
What will actual sales numbers be? Right,
because that's a model that is probably one of their big sellers, right? Like Camrys, Corollas, stuff like that, or I don't know what the economy cars are, 4Runners, Tacomas. Those are the big sellers for that company, right? They don't care about the Supra other than, hey, there's probably an enthusiast that got this smart idea. Man, Fast and the Furious is sick, right? Let's make a Supra. And they're like, yeah, whatever, dude, just fine. Here's a bunch of money. Go make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm saying it's for their own amusement. I mean, They didn't really need to build those cars for that segment. But the problem is between Toyota and Subaru, I mean, just the stock value couldn't be further apart. I mean, Toyota's a massive
Subaru's a small company.
And Subaru's a small company. And so they might not be thinking like, oh, if we don't make 400,000 of these, it's not worth doing it. But they got to look at like, shit, are we going to be able to sell like 10,000 of these? That's a big deal.
So the really interesting thing that I think is worth mentioning with Toyota, and this goes back to the original BRZ, when they first came out with the Scion in the Toyota GT86, at that point Toyota had no sports cars. Like there was no sports car in Toyota's lineup at all, and there hadn't been since the Supra left in like the late 90s. They just completely left any kind of enthusiast in sports car group.
No love for Celicus, huh?
No. And so that was like them kind of putting their toe back into that market, and they saw that there's market there. And I think that was part of the inspiration for them to come out with the Supra. And they didn't really, I don't know how it all transpired, but like they don't really have to do a lot of work to that because it's basically just a a BMW Z4 that they just put a coupe on. Like that, it's like it was almost no different than the Z4. So they've kind of like put not a whole lot of effort to get back in and find out that there's really an enthusiast base for sports cars and for Toyotas, and there's a ton of people that got super excited just by being able to have another Supra again, or to be able to buy a Supra again. And like we were at Super Lap Battle, and Jackie Ding's been super fast in his Supra. How many Supras were out there? They wanted to park all together. It was like 6 or 8 of them.
Yeah, it was
Like
insane.
people that are buying these expensive cars and turning them into race cars, and then like taking them out to tracks and stuff like that.
Well, and again, that's like Tasso said, that's people like us.
Yeah.
You know, there's the mass majority of the Subaru fanboys that are sitting around bitching, and they weren't they weren't planning on buying the new one anyway. They're just pissed off that it's gone, or that it wasn't this, or it's not this.
And so, to the end of Tasso's point earlier is like you haven't seen a lot of people that are buying the brand new STI like really since 2015 and on, and turning them into race cars.
Everyone I know that has, other than you guys, that has a modern Subaru WRX or whatever, it's like, yeah, I live in the mountains, so the 4-wheel drive is nice, and I wanted to like, you know, do a good job going up I-70, so I wanted the one with more horsepower. They're not making race cars. It's just I don't want an SUV.
Well, and so here's the interesting thing from a sales standpoint, Tasso. What I'm kind of wondering is if maybe this decision was in part motivated by sales, which is so like the BRZ, not very many of those were bought. Like it's under 3,000 units sold per year. Now, in part, that's because Subaru only gets a fraction of what Toyota gets is the GT86. So the GT86, their sales numbers are much higher. But when you look at an STI, your yearly sales, I think the most that they've ever sold in a year is 3,500. Maybe they got close to 4,000 at some point, but it's usually under 4,000 units. And I think there've been a number of years where they were under 3,000 units sold of an STI. And that was like the highest price point car for Subaru, which is about, you know, like 40 to mid $40,000 range. They came out with this Solterra, and Subaru tried something different where they let people directly reserve one through Subaru with a minimal, it was $250 down payment. For the first year of production, they're going to make 10,000 Solterras, and they sold out of those 10,000 Solterras in 72 hours. And that's going to be a $50,000 car. So it's like this Solterra is an electric car that's like $5,000 to $10,000 more than an STI, and their initial offering sold out in 72 hours, whereas a lot of times it takes months after the production is done to finally get all of the STIs sold. You know, just because it's there's like the demand from the market is just different. It's not quite there. I'm wondering if the surprise response to the Solterra was in part Subaru read those tea leaves and said, you know what, all electric, that's where this huge demand is. That's where people are willing to spend even more money than we're charging for the STI. We need to put our energies into that instead of keeping the STI going.
All right, and even amongst this tiny market that is the enthusiast base, we're still bored with the STI, right? It's, oh, what, you put plastic fenders on it this year? Oh, we're mad about that. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Who cares, right? Like it, you know, even amongst their niche market, they had lost their niche market kind of thing with it. So whether it was driven by hard numbers or whoever's passion project the Impreza WRX STI is decided that it wasn't worth their passion anymore, or they decided that, you know what is worth my passion? A Crosstrek ERA that's also, you know, built for some next generation of EWRC. I mean, I don't know, whatever, right? Either way, the writing, I think, has been on the wall and is only a good thing. I think to bring it back to STI is Dead, or whatever the title of this episode is, I think it's only a good thing, and I'm excited to see what happens with it, because the cars in our niche market right now are driven by passion, not by numbers, which is why the Supra exists in the first place again, which is why the BRZs are even what they are, because they're not great cars, right? Like they're bloated Miatas with the same amount of horsepower, but they're sick, right? Like
Yeah.
I want one. I want a bloated Miata with more horse or the same amount of horsepower, because nothing we do makes sense, but we go for like this feeling of what we're chasing, right? Our drug is
The
not
driving
something that makes
experience.
sense, right? Yeah. So it's I guess that roundabout rambling right there sums up what I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah. Dussex, it seems like you got something on your mind.
I looked at the stock prices between Toyota and even versus BMW and Subaru, and they're literally giants. And so you see how they're basically, oh, this year we're going to make the Supra this way. Okay, next year we're going to make the Supra this way. Oh, guys want 6 speeds? Yeah, maybe we'll make a Supra like that. So like every year the Supra's had basically different drivetrain layout or different options. And I feel like that company can do whatever the fuck they want. And it's just not what Subaru can do. Subaru just has to try. They either got to hold on to what they've been doing, which is what they have been doing probably for like the last 10 years, or they've got to throw a Hail Mary pass. And it's very possible that
A clean
this
slate.
new STI concept idea is, well, yeah, we got to throw the Hail Mary because our stock's $7 and our competitor and the company who's helping us and the one that regulates what we get to do is at $170 a share, and so it's like, yeah, they got it. I'm thinking this is what this comes down to. I think this is coming down to like, we've got to throw the Hail Mary and we got to try and get back up on top of the scene instead of just dealing with the table.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you guys this, like to kind of this electric direction. Is there any electric car that you guys are excited at all about from a driving standpoint? Like if somebody just threw you the, I don't think they even have keys, but like the keys to a Tesla Model 3, would you be like, oh, this is exciting. I really want to get behind the wheel and play with this thing and see what it's all about? Or is it just kind of like, not that exciting?
Sure.
Brett Bauer rented one when he came to Superlap. He had that Model 3, and my dad, Kyle, we all had our reservations about this thing. Man, we were so fascinated with all the doodads. And I mean, some of it was just like, this is just dumb, but it's entertaining at the same time. You could be watching Netflix movies driving down the road with this car. It's like, It's insane what, these little things have. And we asked Brett, like, hey, Brett, is this thing quick? And without hesitation, my dad and I weren't even ready for it. He mats this thing on this rental Model 3, and it pens us. Like, I was like talking to my dad, I was like, oh, like,
yeah,
not ready for it. I was like, holy shit. Yeah, I mean, am I excited about their straight line performance? I mean, I've heard that the Mach-E's are super rowdy in the straight line, and obviously the Plaids and stuff are. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool, but damn it, if the weight isn't just so intimidating, that's affecting everything else. Even the brakes. Like, there's a guy up in Canada who's I think his name is Sasha, but I can't remember what his shop's name is. But he's modified in a Plaid, and he is just like destroying the brakes in these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and the computer can't keep up with what he's trying to do. Yeah, exactly. These are like 5,000-pound cars. And if somebody said, hey, Ryan, what if we gave you a 700 horsepower Subaru? Like, that'd be sick. What if it was 5,000 pounds? Like, so
right.
Yeah, so that's the scary part, that's the thing that gets me. And I don't know if Subaru has got the money or the engineering to really flex on battery companies to make the next new battery, especially when you have stuff like what's happened in Exide. I don't know if you saw about that Exide plant that just got shut down after decades of lead exposure to employees and all kinds of crazy shit. They're like the third largest battery manufacturer in the world, and they just shut down one of their biggest plants in North America because of all these violations. Like, is this going to be the new thing?
So interesting footnote. Why did Toyota start to invest in Subaru and start to hold a stake in Fuji Heavy Industries?
I mean,
they wanted their battery technology.
Yeah. That's what I was told in the mid 2000s. When I worked at Toyota, they were throwing a bone to the legacy plant to build Camrys and stuff. And a big part of it was trying to nurture that relationship, because the technology that Subaru had was advanced for what Toyota had access to, but they didn't have necessarily the money to completely develop it.
Right. They wanted the battery technology for the Prius. And so Subaru is a bigger company than just cars. It used to be Fuji Heavy Industry, and then Subaru is the car part of it. Now it's all Subaru. But I wouldn't count them out. And Toyota is supposed to be one of the front runners in dry cell technology for lithium batteries. So like I still think in like the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a huge next wave of battery technology for electric vehicles. And Subaru and Toyota, with their relationship, could be right at the pointy end of that. I think that that's certainly possible.
And that would be cool. But then you look at the specs on what the new Solterra is supposed to be. Yeah. And it's 250-mile range or something that's still super short, where there's other companies like Tesla, like Porsche have more advanced battery technology already, which are giving them a 450-mile range on some of this new technology. And here's Subaru like advertised, right? But here's Subaru like, oh yeah, it's super cool, and we have a 250-mile range on our new technology. So it still needs some work.
Here's where I was going with the handling part. It seems like all the electric cars are super fast. It's almost the gimmick of you mat the gas pedal or the throttle, because it's not even a gas pedal, it's a throttle. And then the car is just stupid fast, but the handling just isn't there. Like a lot of the guys with the Teslas, like that start tracking them, like there's a lot to be desired from a handling standpoint. The car that's the most interesting to me that's electric would be the Audi e-tron GT, which is based on the Porsche platform. But like I watched Chris Harris from Top Gear go through that car and said that like once you turn all the nannies off, like that car is fun to drive. It handles like a high power all-wheel drive car handles. And it just looked like an absolute gas. But that's a $160,000 car.
Right.
And it's like, what if, to me, the incentive to Subaru, like maybe this is like the long-term plan, is they know now with the response to the Solterra that there really is this interest in an electric platform. They know that they could build an all-wheel drive car that handles really well. They have got decades of experience developing all-wheel drive platforms. They know that. What if they know that there's an interest in electric? What if they merged the two of them and made an awesome electric car that handled really well? That was like that could stoke enthusiasts' passion like the STI did, but be electric. And they could do it in a car that is like say $60,000 to $80,000 instead of $160,000. And they might have that ability. It's a lot, but I mean maybe
that's still expensive though. I mean $60,000 to $80,000 for a car to any of us is
sure
out of range.
But like from an enthusiast base and considering what's out there, it's not. There's a market
about too, like how do you sell a 400? How do you price a 400 horsepower STI, like without outpricing the market that was existing for it in the first place? And maybe this is how you do it. You basically tap into another market and really lean on that other market that's excited about like e-cars, basically, to kind of shoulder the burden of this.
Yeah. Well, and talking about a clean slate, even with this new STI and having to like change things, I think like Subaru, since the STI came out, has tried to keep the STI, like the base model STI, to have a starting price in like the $33,000 to $35,000 range. Back in 2004, when the car came out, like the cheapest car you could find out there was like $8,000 to $9,000. So like at 35, like the STI was still like, it was kind of a premium spend to get into this car, but you're getting a lot of value. But we were talking about this in the shop the other week. Like the cheapest car that you can buy right now, I think, is like a Honda Fit, and it's $17,000. Like there's almost no cars that are below $20,000, but Subaru is still trying to keep the STI like 33, 35. So they're trying to hold to this price point. And I think from a development standpoint, from a technology standpoint, they're thinking, well, we can't make a 400 horsepower STI because we can't do that and keep it $35,000. But it's like, well, the market has moved up, and like the bottom has moved up, but you haven't moved the STI up. And to be fair, like the counterpoint to that is, okay, well, if you make an STI that's $45,000 to $50,000, now what cars are you competing with? If now the starting price of an STI is $50,000, what other cars start at $50,000?
Well,
That's what a F-150 costs nowadays, right?
Yeah.
So
right. Well, and that was already basically in the budget from when they released the pricing on the new WRX.
Right.
I mean, their top of the line WRX was $42,000.
So
right?
it's like
we had to have known the STI
thrown
was
that out.
already going to be, $45,000 to $50,000 anyway, if it was going to be that 400 horsepower range.
And there's part of me that wonders if they pulled the plug because they realized what the price point was going to have to be. They knew what their average sales of an STI was.
And everybody hated the way it looked.
And maybe, and I really wonder if they did not shoot for the moon with whatever they had been working on and developed. Like, what if it was like, what if the new STI was $50,000 and it made 330 horsepower, or even 340 like the S209 does? Would 340 horsepower at $50,000 be enough to get anybody to buy one? If it was basically like a slightly tweaked engine that makes a little bit more power, same exact drivetrain, like no other fancy bells and whistles, and that's it. Would they sell more than 1,000 of them? Versus like, okay, if we can come up with an electric car that brings the Subaru STI performance for an electric car, what is much lower, like something that's comparable to a Model 3, but that way outperforms and has a lot more driving assignment than a Model 3. That all of a sudden, like maybe that's the new market that Subaru wants to try and establish themselves in. And if they did that, it would be kind of a game changer compared to, what the STI could be is more of like a head scratcher.
And it's also possible to assume too that a lot of the if they just scrap the STI and all the work that they've done up to this point, and they are really trying to start from scratch, and they made this decision in the last minute, and it was a hard decision for them to make. I'm sure that this easily possible with the WRX out there in existence, that they'll be able to trickle down some of this stuff from the STI into it in special editions and special models and stuff. Like they've had that before with Legacies. They've had that. They have that over in Europe already. I mean, and in Asia and stuff. I mean, there's a possibility that for them, they look at it as like, okay, not all of our engineering and research is lost from our original STI concept. Let's just try and sell those into the WRX. And if listening and thinking about how they had 3,000, 4,000 sales in STI, but seeing how fast the 500 limited edition S209s went, I mean, it almost seems like a no-brainer to try and just do like these 500 special releases in a WRX that's not necessarily an STI. Maybe it's like a spec R or whatever the shit they want to call it,
or TS, tuned by STI, just like the BRZ.
And then you do a limited 500 model production and hopefully recoup a little bit of your engineering losses and then call it good.
And think about the S209. I mean, that car went for like $60,000-$70,000. Like that. So it's like maybe you could get the performance and get it at the price point because it's exclusive and it's a limited production. Like an S210 with the dual clutch transmission that makes 400 horsepower, but there's only 1,000 of them. Like if the next one comes out and it has that, but there's only 1,000, what does that go for?
Yeah. I mean, and especially knowing that it's something's funny about it, like knowing that it's in a limited production vehicle makes people want it more than knowing they could just walk into the dealership and buy an STI any month that they feel like, and I mean, even like they did with the colors, like the hyper blue STIs and the silly orange WRXs. I mean, and those, the yellow series BRZs, those are all like limited 500 per, cars. But when you really look at like the amount of cars they sell in North America and those model lineups, it's like, shit, that represented like 20% of our sales in 1 year was just painting it one color. How much easier is that?
It got people excited about it because it's a difference, like the series yellow, they had the Brembos, like it was a nice package and you got a lot for that. There was some exclusivity, which the STI used to have, but like it didn't. Like there was the special edition in 2010, and then the Type RA, which I think also did reasonably well in 2018. So like they've done well with these limited production special editions. That That would be interesting if they kept it on that way.
Well,
Yeah,
and,
so I mean, not all is lost. Maybe we will get painted body cladding instead of the plastic stuff and get a little bit lower and shit like that,
Yeah.
I think remember also the RARs and the Spec Cs and stuff like that are homologation cars too.
Yeah.
And less so nowadays, right? Now they're just limited edition, Air Jordans or whatever. But like the history of these cars is homologation specials, which I think are some of the coolest. Like what gets me excited, like the question you asked some time ago about electric cars, what would I be interested in? I'd be interested in a homologation special for an EGT series. Like I want to know, what's the BMW M EGT homologation car, right? Because that gave us the wide body E30 M3s, right?
Yeah.
Like what that's what I'm excited to see.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. M3 Evo. Show me a Mercedes.
Yeah, the 160.
Right. Like these are that's what I would be excited for.
Yeah.
Whatever, Volkswagen has all that IDR research and technology now and been successful at Pikes Peak. Show me a Jetta homologation special or something like that, right? A GTI homologation special from those guys. That's
with some of that technology in it.
Right. Show me a BRZ GT300 homologation special.
Yes, please.
Right.
Yes,
That'd be
please.
super cool.
There's very little because I don't care that much about street cars. I would rather have like my old hood rat daily, a ghetto swapped bug eye that's all blacked out and murdered out and just hood rats around versus some Huayra or whatever. I mean,
where there's like 10 of them and they're a bajillion dollars and you're never gonna see one in
I'm
life.
a closet Tifosi, so I'm a sucker for a Ferrari. But outside of that, I just don't care about sporty street cars all that much. When hood rats can do more for less and have that much more character. But homologation cars, I'll totally fangirl over. Like
that would be really cool.
Yeah.
So here's the other thought that I had, and Tasso, this is actually what kind of made me think of it is the 4 electric motors and then the video that we did with you about setting up a differential. And that got me to thinking, well, like if you've got a motor on each wheel, and like right now to control the performance of a car that's gasoline powered, you have to control a differential and how that power is distributed to the wheel, because the engine is always turning, the transmission is always turning, the power is always going to that axle, and the differential is the tool that you have to kind of change some of that characteristic, but that's it. But the thought that dawned on me is if you have 4 motors, like if they do it right, and this is all right, Subaru, for those of you at Subaru that are still listening, here's the top tip. There should be a dial or something like the SI drive where you can control the performance of each axle with those electric motors. Like if you have 4 electric motors, to get the rear axle to behave like it has a one-way, 1.5 way, or 2-way differential should be academic. Like that could be just a mode in it. Like there would be no difference because those motors could just behave in whatever way they would need to do to behave like that differential.
Well, and think about that too, not just switching up simulated limited slips, but you could have your gravel 4-wheel drive system and then just turn that part off and essentially go to a simulated spool in the rear and have a rear-wheel drive drift car at the push of a button, right?
Literally.
You could.
So the only other production vehicle that I'm aware of that has 4 motors is the Rivian truck. And there's a video out there, and I don't know, maybe I'll link it in the description, where they took it out to Utah and went up this incredible, crazy rock chute formation with this stock Rivian and basically kind of stock truck tires, nothing fancy, and went up this insane run. But they were able to do it all because they had individual wheel control. And so if a wheel started to slip, it just stopped moving, or it would change how it's applying the torque to that wheel in a live fashion to get it to do whatever it needed to do to get up this thing. And it's just what if you took that technology and that control that you now have by having an electric motor on each wheel and then applied it to driving on dirt, applied it to driving at the track? I mean, there's a massive potential there. That could be so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of Evo guys back in the day when they had factory yaw control.
Yeah.
and the competition setups, they would remove that system because it wasn't reliable, it was inconsistent, and it led to poor driving characteristics and stuff like that. So, but we're in the 21st century now where I can land a spaceship with my iPhone. So the technology is there, but that's, I think, where if we're going to see that, it'll be homologation cars and stuff like that, because I guarantee you that IDR had torque vectoring and stuff like that going on.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's see it.
But that's like, to me, to get excited about an electric car, that would be exciting. Like if you handed me the I don't know, the fob or whatever it is, the iPad to start an STI ERA that gave me these switches, like I could dial in like how the front axle behave, how the rear axle behaves, and stuff like that. Like,
yeah,
I totally want to
just
drive
sell the
and play
car.
with that. Yeah.
Okay, Subaru, give me drift mode.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, drift mode,
Right.
engage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
Subaru,
I
make
didn't
me
quite
faster.
get that. Did you say you're a drag racer today?
Oh, Subaru, you know me.
Yep. Busted.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as we're kind of winding down, it seems like the consensus is there's maybe some actual reason for optimism even with this announcement. Like it could mean there could be a lot of positive things that come out of this in many different forms, like a smaller platform that gets them back in the WRC, the possibility of a higher performing BRZ, the possibility of a really cool electric STI, the possibility of maybe a special edition WRX that's actually made by STI that maybe gives us all the performance that we want. So maybe there's some cause for optimism here. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you have to hope. I mean, and it's all speculation as far as what we're doing right now. But again, the two cars out there that have me afraid is what Mitsubishi did with the Evo and what Mustang has done with what Ford has done with the Mustang Mach-E. So I mean, of course, it's all speculation. I still have fears, but I'll try and be optimistic.
Yeah,
there's one thing you count on. It's like capitalism will try and sell your nostalgia for a couple of cents more per unit. So count on them selling your soul out from underneath you, and you won't have a choice. So just get a cool car, whatever it's called.
So if they came out with a WRC edition GC STI limited edition, but it was all electric, but it looked like the GC WRC car.
Well, hell yeah, sign me up.
Yeah, I think
Tasso,
you just solved it for Subaru.
I think they're ugly though. Like, don't tell anyone I said this. I think GCs are ugly.
No, nobody's gonna hear this, Tasso. You're not gonna get a lot of hate mail for that at all.
I think the only good-looking Subarus are 2004 and 2005.
That's Tasso
WRXs.
OTC Racing on Facebook and on Instagram.
Send hate mail directly to him.
Hate mail direct to him. Yeah.
Just make sure you like, share, and subscribe or whatever. I don't care.
Like, share, subscribe, and then send him hate mail.
Yeah, I don't care. That's fine. I'll fight you on that.
So either way, I have an STI race car, and now I have an STI daily driver. I'm pretty set. So regardless of what they do in the future, I still have my gas burners, and I'll be okay with it.
You're sitting on $200,000 of collector cars, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Pretty much. I mean,
right.
the STI daily that I just paid nickels for. I mean, hell, it just really went up in price. So
man, you know what? It's towards the end, but it's an interesting point. Like in my mindset, I was really kind of hesitant to go back and like play with my WX wagon again, because I was really kind of putting a lot of my eggs in this new STI's basket. But now that it's not there, there's part of me that's like I wasn't going to put a 6-speed swap in it, but now I can't get an STI. At least I can't get a new one. It's not going to be what I wanted it to be. I've got a car that's like 80% of what I want it to be. Why not?
But you have to take that $40,000 you saved and put it all into your bug eye.
I've already done that. It's just, do I want to do that again?
Yeah.
Two more times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I heard you promise the fans. They'll be mad at you.
Yeah. Folks, you can write me letters. That's OTC Racing on Facebook and on Instagram. Yes.
OTC the world.
OTC the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe this will actually stoke people to actually. All right, you're not going to build the STI that I want. I'm going to go back and just build the STI that I want, because I'm not going to wait anymore. So I don't know. Good place to end on a high note is any. Any closing thoughts as we wrap this thing up, gentlemen? No. All right. Well,
Subaru, you better do something great.
better do something great, and you
Yeah.
better tell us about it like yesterday. Like
Right.
don't keep us on.
We need some news.
Yeah, it's like you got 3 months. Like you wait 6
Yeah.
months and it's going to be bad. You wait a year or something. Like let us in what your plans are. It's going to be real bad. So you gotta
Your
let us
stunt
know.
worked. The stunt worked. Give us the payoff now.
Yep,
Mhm.
exactly. We're ready. Cool. Well, thanks very much everybody at home for listening. Thanks for your support as always. And until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.